Hello, Greek class. Hope everyone is doing well, that you are adjusting to your online classes okay, and that everyone is staying safe and healthy through this pandemic. We are going to try and make this experience as painless as possible for all of you. So as you look at this video lecture, feel free to break this up into smaller portions. You don't have to watch this all at once. I will put some timestamps into the video description so you can jump straight to those portions of the lecture if you want to break this up. Otherwise, you can just power straight through this, and yeah, it's up to you. Just have this done by the end of the week and you'll be in good shape. So at this point, I'm going to take myself out of the picture. We'll just have the lecture notes up on the screen and you'll hear me talking about this. All right. So let's put that up there. I'm going to start off here, chapter 19. The title of this chapter is Contract and Liquid Verbs. And so let's first ask a question. What is a contract verb? Don't think of these as anything too special or out of the ordinary. This is just a category of the regular verb conjugation pattern. Okay, the verbs that you've been learning about all year long, these contract verbs are going to take the same endings. They're going to work in the same way. Just one thing that's a little bit strange about these, they have a vowel at the end of their stems. Okay, for example, I've put up a contract verb here. Look at that verb there, poieo. Okay, this verb means I make or I do. And there you can see I've put it in red if you're reading that verb poieo. It has that short vowel, that epsilon at the end of the stem, which makes this a contract verb. And this short vowel at the end of the stem is going to blend, or what we call contract, with the vowels in the endings, the verb endings, to produce a new vowel or combination of vowels. Now that really is the only difference in these contract verbs. They're going to look slightly different right there where the stem joins the endings. When I was looking at teaching this chapter, I thought really we should probably move this section. We could move this like right at the end of chapter 15 when we're done with all of the indicative voice or the indicative mood verb patterns. We could just talk about contract verbs because they are just another category of regular verbs. So they have these short vowels at the end of the stem, and there are 3 contract vowels specifically. If you see one of these at the end of a verb stem, it means it is a contract vowel. Those 3 contract vowels are alpha, epsilon, and omega. Now, if you have a verb and the stem ends in any other vowel, it is not a contract verb. Okay? Contract verbs will only have their stem ending in alpha, epsilon, and omicron. Now, here are some examples of contract verbs. So I put up the example before, poieo, I make or I do. There's also some others, delao, omicron-contract, which means I show. Harao, which is an alpha contract, it means I see. Phileo, epsilon contract, means I love. Zao, there's another alpha contract, meaning I live. And plerao, another omicron contract, which means I fulfill. Now here's something to note. The contract vowel at the end of the stem, those short vowels, they must be one of those 3 contract vowels mentioned in the previous slide. There you have plerao is an omicron contract, and so the stem ends in an omicron. Once again, there are verbs that end in vowels that are not contract verbs. Okay, so I've put 3 verbs here. Luo, this verb that we've been looking at all year long. Then you have estheo and pistuo. These 3 have stems all ending in vowels. Luo is ending in upsilon as well as pistuo. Both of those have the upsilon at the end. And estheo ends in an iota. But these verbs do not end in alpha, epsilon, or omicron. So therefore, they are not contract verbs. So, how do we form a contract verb once we know what a contract verb is? Don't make this overly complicated. These contract verbs will take the exact same endings that you have learned so far over the course of this year. Now, if you need some help remembering, I've put up some of these endings or these systems of endings to help you remember. Present active indicative, if you remember, o eis e, amen ete usen. That's first, second, third person singular, and then first, second, third person plural. You have then present middle passive indicative, amai e etai, ametha este antai. If you need to refresh your memory on that, these endings can be found in chapter 12. Then aorist passive indicative, these endings are found in chapter 15. These endings look like this: ein, eis, e, amen, ete, eison. Okay, and I've put etc., etc. there, just going through all of those different permutations of tense and voice. You got present active, present middle passive, future active, future middle, aorist active, perfect middle passive. All of those different combinations, they all have those 6 endings. If you need to review these endings to each tense and voice combination, you probably should, especially if you've forgotten them over the extended spring break. This quarter, everything that we do will assume that you are familiar with these conjugation patterns. Okay, so take the time to re-memorize them if you have forgotten. The verb chapters are chapter 3, chapter 7, chapter 10, then 12, 13, 14, 15, I believe, are all of the verb chapters that we've had so far. Okay, but you will need those endings to do these contract verbs, because the contract verbs will take those same endings. So what's different about these contract verbs? I just said that they take the same endings, but what's different about them? Okay, contract verbs, they have that vowel at the end of the stem. And that vowel will contract or blend with the vowel at the beginning of the verb ending. Okay, I went over this before, but I'll say it again. This produces a new vowel or diphthong. Now, something to remember, these contract rules will only work in the present tense and the imperfect tense. Okay, the imperfect tense is based on the present stem. And so the actual contraction only happens in those 2 tenses, the present and the imperfect. You do not have to worry about contraction in other tenses, and we'll go over those briefly a little bit later. Only the present and imperfect contract once again. So let's look at these contract equations. What happens when you have a contract vowel which encounters the vowel of the ending? Okay. I'll just go over that first column. You can look at those other ones, but the alpha contracts, for example, if you have a verb that ends in the alpha stem, it will then blend with the ending vowel to produce a new vowel or vowel combination. With the alphas, the alpha of the stem blends with any E sound in the ending. Okay, so this is epsilon or eta. That produces an alpha. If you have an alpha in the stem and your ending begins with omicron, omega, or the diphthong omicron upsilon, that will produce an omega. Then alpha plus any combination with iota. Okay, the present active indicative, for example, the second person is epsilon iota sigma. That is a combination with an iota. So your alpha and your ending vowel would blend to form an alpha with an iota subscript. All right, that's the alpha column, you can go ahead and look at the other two columns. I won't go over those in detail, but they are also found in your textbook at the beginning of chapter 19. Okay, so in the middle column, you've got your epsilon contracts, and the final column there, you have your omicron contracts. All right, so now let's get into the specific forms of a contract verb. This is an alpha contract, timao, and timao means I honor. Okay, so we're going to go over the present active indicative, and this will show you how the contractions work. Okay. First of all, look at this slide. I've put the endings up there. They're highlighted in red, and these endings should be very familiar to you. This works exactly the same way as your previous verbs. You just take the stem, drop that omega ending, and then put on the appropriate endings onto the end of the stem. So first person singular, timao, second person timaes, third person timae, okay, etc. Plurals, timaamen, timaete, and timausin. Present active endings that we've had since chapter 3. Very easy stuff, right? All right, now I've highlighted the end of the verb stem there. This is where you get your equations from the contraction chart. Okay, so have a look at this one now. You go timao for the first person singular, but you can't just leave it there. It's not just timao. Alpha plus an omega blends to form an omega. So you have timao becomes timo. Second person singular, timaes becomes timas because you have alpha plus a combination with iota becomes alpha with an iota subscript. So you're left with timas with the iota subscript. Third person singular, alpha plus, again, a combination with iota becomes alpha with an iota subscript, tima. Then your plurals, alpha plus any O sound, in this case it's an omicron, becomes an omega. Tima amen becomes timomen. Second person plural, alpha plus an E sound, here it's an epsilon, becomes an alpha, timate. And your third person plural, alpha plus the omicron upsilon diphthong produces an omega, timosin. All right, so hopefully everyone can see that. The endings added to the stem, and you see how that alpha at the end of the stem contracts with the vowels in the endings to produce a new vowel or vowel combination. Here's one thing about these contract verbs that you'll need to remember. Although the dictionary form of the verb, that is sort of that basic form that you look up in the dictionary or in your vocab list, that form is always going to be listed as the uncontracted first person singular of the present. Okay, so for example, timao, that's uncontracted. It has the alpha on there. And that's what you would look up in the dictionary. In your vocab list at the end of this chapter, it'll have timao with that alpha still on there, and it'll give you the meaning I honor. However, the forms in the text that you read are always going to be contracted. All right? These contract verbs never appear uncontracted in a regular text. Okay? It will always be timo. Just with that omega, you'll never see the alpha when you're reading along in the Bible or in one of your translation exercises. Okay, so that's something to remember. One weird thing about these contract verbs. Okay, you look up your dictionary form uncontracted, but when you're working in the text, it will always be the contracted form. All right, moving on. There is a chart in your textbook, page 134, and it gives the conjugation patterns for the present tense for 3 types of contract verbs. Okay, if you look on page 134, you will see it has 3 verbs there, timao, then phileo, for the epsilon contract and de lao for the omicron contract. Okay. And all of those work the same way. Okay, you have your alpha contracts, and they combine. The epsilon contracts will combine with those same present tense endings, and then the omicron contracts have their own way of contracting. Okay, when you're memorizing these, you could just memorize the entire chart, or the other way that you could do it is memorize the sort of contraction equations at the beginning of the chapter, and then you'll just know how to do them. You'll kind of know the principle of how to do them. Okay, or you could memorize the specific endings. Different people have different ways of doing that. I don't know what's easier for you, but you can just do those however you wish. Memorize the endings or memorize the sort of way that you can do them. Okay. Now moving on, pages 135 and 136, you have the conjugation patterns for those same three contract verbs, timao, phileo, and delao. But these are in different tense and voice combinations. You added the imperfect active, the present middle passive, and then the imperfect middle passive. I'm not going to go over all of those, but here's the chart for the imperfect active. Okay, and I've kind of blown that up, put in all of the kind of the parts of that, so that you can see exactly how that works. Okay, the verb that I'm using there is phileo. Now remember, this is imperfect, so it's going to get an augment at the beginning of the stem with phileo because it begins with a consonant. The augment is simply the letter epsilon. If you do have to write this down, don't forget the breath mark there, the smooth breathing mark over the epsilon. Then you've got your verb stem, philet, with the epsilon, and then the endings. And after the equal sign, you've got the contraction. Okay, so first person singular, ephileon, with the epsilon contract, you get the contraction ephiloon. And then you can go over the rest of the chart there. Ephiloon, ephilase, ephile, ephilumen, ephileta, ephiloon. Okay. And yeah, again, this is the imperfect active. So this would be phileo means I love. So ephiloon is I was loving. Okay, emphasizing continuous action or repeated action in the past. Ephiloon, I was loving. Ephilase, you were loving. Ephile, he, she, or it was loving. All right, so that is the imperfect active for phileo, the contract verb phileo. And you can go over the rest of the charts on pages 135 and 136 to get the other forms of the contract verbs. Now, here is a sort of in-class quiz to see how you're following along. Let's look at the omicron-contract verb de lao, and let's go over the present middle passive indicative. All right, now first of all, you should know the endings for the present middle passive. Okay, if you don't know them, go back to chapter 12 and find those endings there. But I've put those endings up here in red. Amai e etai, ametha este antai. Okay, that's the uncontracted endings. Now let's add the omicron at the end of the stem de lao. And so you can see all of those forms now. The omicron has been added to the ending, and I've given you the contracted ending now. Okay, omicron plus amai equals umai. Omicron plus eta with an iota subscript in the second person singular is oi. simply oi. Okay, and you can go through the rest of them and look at those. Now, let's put all of this information together, the endings plus the contraction plus the stem of de lao, which gives you this. Okay, the fully contracted chart for the verb de lao. De lumai, de loi, de lutai, plurals de lumetha, de lusthe, de luntai. All right, so go back to the last couple of slides if you don't know how I got to this. Okay, but again, those are just the standard present middle passive endings combined with the omicron at the end of the stem should give you then these endings here that you're seeing. All right, moving on. I mentioned before that contraction only happens in the present and imperfect. The contraction happens, but the other tenses don't contract, but there is this extra step in these tenses that still distinguishes these from kind of your normal verbs. Okay, so in your other tenses, future, aorist, and perfect, there will be this slight change, okay? And what is that change? Typically, these tenses are characterized by a letter added to the end of the stem, right? In the future, you have a sigma. In the first aorist, also a sigma at the end of the stem. Then in the perfect active, you have a kappa. Okay? For these tenses, then, the future, aorist, and perfect, what you're going to do is lengthen that contract vowel, which is that short vowel at the end of the stem. Okay, we're going to lengthen it. Alpha and epsilon become eta. Omicron becomes omega. Then, after you do that, then you add on your letter as normal. Okay, so look at the bottom here of this slide, phileo. To make the future, first of all, you take that contract vowel, that epsilon, lengthen the epsilon to an eta. Then, because it is a future, you're going to add a sigma. And then after that sigma, add the future active endings. Okay, first person singular omega, second person singular epsilon iota sigma, third person singular epsilon iota. Okay, so phileso, phileses, philese. And then you can do the plurals by yourselves. Okay. All right, you can get a chart of the future, aorist, and perfect tense endings on pages 136 and 137. Okay, one thing to note is that there are lots more forms than these. All right, the author only gives you the first person singular and then sort of expects you to know that there are 5 other forms for each chart. Again, the author and I are sort of going off of the assumption that you know the endings for all of those tense voice combinations. Now let's do another quick quiz, in-class quiz here. What are the perfect active indicative forms of the verb? Let's work with timao again, this alpha contract. And let's go over this together. Okay, starting out with the familiar verb chart there. Blank 6 forms there, first, second, third person singular, first, second, third person plural. Okay, and what are you going to do first? Let's start off by filling in these 6 forms. The stem of the verb timao in each of the 6 positions. What do we do next? All right, because this is a perfect tense, what do we start out with? Okay, because this is a perfect, it gets a reduplication at the beginning of each form. If you remember how to do reduplication, timao begins with a tau, which is a consonant. So just put that same consonant at the beginning. Put the tau at the beginning, join it up with an epsilon. And so we get the reduplication at the beginning of each form. Now, after reduplication, what tells us that this is a perfect active indicative? It gets a kappa at the end of the stem, right? But because this is a contract verb, there is one extra step. Before we attach the kappa, we are going to take that contract vowel, that alpha at the end of the stem, we're going to lengthen it in each position to an eta. Okay, alpha and epsilon lengthen to an eta. Then after we have lengthened the alpha to the eta, now let's go ahead and attach the kappa. Then after the kappa, finally, we're going to add the endings. The perfect active indicative endings now appear in red. If these do not look familiar to you, look at page 73 in the textbook, okay, chapter 10. Remember, this is a perfect tense, so there's no contraction happening, okay? You don't have to worry about contracting the alpha with the alpha, okay? Instead, we lengthened the alpha in the contract vowel, then added the kappa, so there is no contraction happening here. Only happens in the present and imperfect tenses. All right, so how did you do? There's the completed form chart, the perfect active indicative of timao. All right, if you've followed along so far, you're doing really well. That is the end of the contraction, the contract verbs. But if you remember from the beginning, this chapter was entitled Contract and Liquid Verbs. So this chapter is going to conclude with a short discussion of these verbs called liquid verbs. Okay, liquid verbs, this does not refer to the action of the verb in any way. This is not a verb that is talking about flowing or melting or anything like that. This actually refers to the structure of the verb. Okay, a liquid verb specifically is a verb with a stem that ends in one of what we call the four liquid consonants. And you can find those liquid consonants on the screen there. Lambda, mu, nu, and rho. All right. Like the contract verbs, the changes to liquid verbs only happen in a few tenses. Okay, in liquid verbs, you only have to worry about strange things happening in the future and the first aorist tenses. All right, what is the difference? In stark contrast to the verbs that we have been studying all year, liquid verbs do not have a sigma at the end of the stem in the future and the first aorist. Okay, be careful with this. This is really weird. All right, every other verb that we have studied is going to get in the future and first aorist a sigma at the end of the stem, but in liquid verbs, they do not get that telltale sigma. Okay, so what is the difference? Okay, in the future form, you do not get a sigma, but the future forms of liquid verbs look exactly like present tense epsilon contract verbs. Okay, again, there is no sigma in the future, but the future forms of the liquid verbs will look exactly like epsilon contracts. Then in the aorist forms, they will also lack a sigma, but they take standard, regular first aorist endings. One other thing about this, in the future and aorist tenses, liquid verbs often, but not always, undergo a slight stem change. Okay, you can look at the chart on page 137 if you'd like to see that. All right, 137 gives you a list of these. Note, for example, that first one there, angelo. it undergoes a stem change in the future. The stem change is very slight. It just drops off one of the lambdas. And then in the first aorist, it also drops a lambda, but then it adds an iota there, angela. All right, so you have these slight stem changes, but fortunately, they are not difficult to recognize, right? Angela does not look significantly different from angelo. All right, so it's one thing to talk about it in theory, but let's go over an example. Your liquid verb meno. In the future tense, there is no stem change, so we are going to add our sigma as usual. But Greek doesn't like that letter combo, so they're going to stick an epsilon before the sigma, okay, making meneso. However, another big however here, Greek does not like a sigma between those two vowels at epsilon and omega. So we're going to drop the sigma. All right, now that is why your liquid verbs do not have a sigma in the future tense. Okay, because we have all this stuff going on behind the scenes. We're dropping the sigma, then you have meneo. But remember from our conversation before about epsilon contracts, okay? You cannot have meneo, epsilon, omega. That initiates a contract between those two. And then we have the forms down below, okay? The future active indicative of meno looks like this, okay? First person singular, meno. And look at that. Isn't that just great? Your future tense form is meno. Present tense stem is meno. So that singular form there can mean either I wait or I abide, meno, present, or it can also mean meno in the future. Okay, I will wait. Okay, so just be careful of that. That single form can do double duty. It looks exactly the same in the present and the future. Okay, then your second person singular menes, third person singular mene. First person plural now, because of the contract there, you have menumen. Epsilon plus omicron contracts to menumen. Then you have menete in the second person plural. Because of that epsilon contract. And then in the third person plural, it's simply menusin. All right. Remember before I said you only have to worry about contraction in the present and imperfect. We need to add this exception to that now, except when you are dealing with liquid verbs. Okay, then you will not have a contraction in the present, but you will in the future tense. So again, liquid verbs. In the future, there is no sigma, but there is a contraction. This gets a lot less confusing in the aorist because there is no contraction to worry about in the aorist. Okay, meno gets a slight stem change. We're going to add the epsilon in the middle of there. Mena now. And of course, because this is a liquid verb, there's no sigma. So here on the screen are the 6 forms of meno in the first aorist active. Okay, as you can see there, because it is an aorist, we're all going to get epsilons at the beginning with smooth breathing marks. Normally, we would get also a sigma at the end, but because this is a liquid verb, no sigma in the aorist. And then your regular aorist ending. So first person singular, emena. Second person singular, emenas. Third person singular, emene or emenen. Movable nu. Moving to the plurals, we have emenamen, first person, emenata, second person, and emenon, third person plural. All right, I've put a caveat here. It's really not worth it to spend too much time memorizing patterns regarding liquid verbs. Okay, there really isn't much of a pattern. If you look on page 137, you'll see that there isn't a great way to tell just how these things change. Okay, instead, what I think you should do whenever you're encountering a verb like this, look out for those liquid letters at the end of the stems. Okay, liquid letters, again, one of those four, lambda, mu, nu, and rho. And be familiar with what they do. Okay, if a verb ends in one of those, it will not have a sigma in the future or the aorist. Okay. Probably the best way to do this is just to look at the chart on the bottom of page 137. That will give you the most common liquid verbs. And it also gives you those forms that you need to be aware of in the future tense and the aorist tense. Okay, so have a look at those. Be aware of how those change, but probably not worth it to memorize those. Okay, just be aware that there is this weird little subfamily of verbs called liquid verbs, and they do some strange things, particularly in the future and the aorist. Okay. So there you go. That's the end of chapter 19. Here are some notes about what is going to be happening this week. I have not emailed the quizzes to you yet. I will be getting those to you. I'm also looking at possibly posting those on Blackboard. If I can remember how to use Blackboard, I will post those so you can check in on those. But for now, I think I'll just email them. These quizzes, just do them at your leisure. I've given you the key as well so you can check your own work. So this quarter, quizzes are going to be very low stress items, I'm hoping. You'll get 2 or 3 of them in each chapter, but yeah, just fill them out whenever you want. Have a look at how you're doing, and yeah, they're mostly just for you to keep up with your own progress and see how you're doing in the material. Okay. The only thing to turn in, the only thing due from chapter 19 are the translation exercises. These will also be emailed to you, and they are due by noon on Wednesday, April 15. All right. Yeah, so quizzes coming. Do those whenever you want. Check your own work. Turn in the exercises numbers 1 through 8 for chapter 19 by next Wednesday. And if you do that, if you've made it through this lecture and you do all of the assignments, congratulations on finishing the first chapter of this very strange and unusual online quarter. All right, as usual, if you have any questions, you can email me. I hope all of you have my email address. They are asking us to use only the lasierra.edu email addresses, so get that. I'll put a link to that in the description just in case you need it. All right, but yeah, that is the first chapter, chapter 19. I hope everyone again is having a pretty smooth transition to this, if possible. If there is anything that I can do to help you out with that transition, please let me know. All right. Yeah, email me whenever you need to. If there was anything that wasn't clear from this lecture, also you can contact me. I may schedule a Zoom meeting so that we can all get together at some point this week. It would be either Wednesday or Friday during regular class time at 10 o'clock. All right, so that we can just get together and I can answer any questions that you might have. I'm still waiting on the School of Religion was supposed to get me some changes that they needed done to the syllabus with the online realities in mind, but I haven't seen anything like that. If I don't get anything in the next couple of days, I'll just go ahead and write up that syllabus and send it to you so that you'll have it. Okay. Yeah, again, let me know if there are any questions, if you're having any problems. If you hear of anybody who's having problems, yeah, just let me know. All right. And other than that, have a good day. Have a good rest of this first week. I am praying for you. I'm remembering you. And I am here to help.